I am ecstatic to welcome Laurent Nègre, a filmmaker extraordinaire who has produced one of the best films that I've seen in a long time. It's called A Forgotten Man. It's in limited release here in the States. I understand it came out in 2022, but it's finally making its way over stateside. And if you are anywhere near a theater playing this, you owe it to yourself to go see it. It is a I hesitate to call it a World War II drama because it is unlike any other World War II film that I've ever seen. It's more of a psychological uh, tale of guilt and denial and horror, honestly. So I want to get into all of that, but before I do, I want to welcome Laurent. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. Thank you very much for welcoming me on your program. Thank you.
Well, I'm honored to have you here, sir. I want to talk about, well, first of all, what the film is. What was the inspiration for it? Can you tell us a bit about A Forgotten Man?
It had been a long time. I wanted to film something to tell a story about this specific period in time, and especially the role of Switzerland during World War II. Who's we know little about that, and in the country we don't talk much about this. Switzerland is a very discreet country, and it doesn't like to face its past. So it took me a long time, and when I discovered that play by Thomas Hurtling called The Envoy, I loved the play, but I liked the character mostly. What interested me was to discover that through this diplomat's story, we could tell much more about how the country behaved during World War II. So I started to do my own research. It took me 10 years to make that movie, so it was a very long time. It was hard to produce. We didn't get funding for it from the state because maybe, as you certainly know, most European movies, it's not like in the States we rely on public money, on public funds. So we have to we have to collect different funds to be able to finance a movie. So the subject itself, I think, scared the institutions because it's not, we don't have so many films about World War II in Switzerland. Most of them, they are, when they are good and solid, they are documentaries. And I didn't want to go for the documentary. I really insisted and I wanted to treat that time through a fiction. And what I call my film a documented fiction. That means it's based on solid research, and it's a mix between dramaturgy that I wrote because it's a screenplay. You need to invite the viewer to feel emotions, to develop a certain empathy for the protagonist, but still the facts are well researched and documented. I'm
So,
going in different directions in my answer. I'm sorry.
oh no, that's fine. This is getting to the heart of it. You mentioned it was difficult to make. Was it difficult to write? Were any of those kind of roadblocks that you mentioned about sort of culturally not wanting to, talk about or promote, perhaps Switzerland's role in what happened in World War II? Were those the obstacles? Were they creative obstacles? Was it primarily like funding related and things like that? Because 10 years is a long time to commit to one project, certainly.
It's not, of course, it's not the only thing that I was doing
Oh, sure.
for the last 10 years, but um, yeah, it was a mix actually, because creatively, when you treat that period, when you attack this subject, you always have the feeling that there are many films about that time, not so many, as I said, about the role of Switzerland during that period. But you have to be careful not to do one more film about this time. You need to make it special. And what I wanted to do was really to focus on that guy in the aftermath of the war, and through this kind of mix between political and historical drama and family drama, to be able to tell a complex story through a simple form. And and that is why also it's a movie that really is based on a few characters, almost a single location, which is the family house. It has a certain claustrophobic feeling sometimes to it, but it's close to what the character lives in his head, because he's kind of trapped. It tells the story of a guy who little by little realizes that He will not make it out of this trap that has been built around him, that he contributed to build as well. But still, he finds himself in the role of the scapegoat in the end, because what he is the reflection of what the government wanted him to be during the period. He was in Berlin from 38 to 45, and all the decisions that he took were not his. He had little autonomy. He was the reflection of what the Swiss government decided to, how it decided to interact with the Germans. And once the Allied forces reach victory, then he becomes very undesirable, and people need to get him out of the light. And that's the thing that he will have to understand. And even if it's a let's say he made a very wrong choices, or he acted in a very dubious way, we still feel empathy for him, because the way he's treated is unfair.
That's very interesting take because, looking back through, 2024 lens to something that happened, almost 100 years ago and has been well documented through history, it is very easy to see, there's that whole idea of just following orders. To your point, he was a diplomat. He was kind of assigned a role and he fulfilled it to the best of his ability because he had a job and he had a family to take care of. But then looking back on it, even he realizes, as you kind of point out, when things went south for his position, he fell on the wrong side of history, as they say, and he had to kind of reconcile some things with himself. The movie does a great job of portraying him as someone who isn't outright a monster. He's very much human with human desires and human frailties. But you just kind of wonder how swept up, how blind could he have been to the atrocities that he allowed to happen through his actions. There's one very specific character. And it's hard film to talk about without spoiling it for everybody, because I think one of the beautiful things about A Forgotten Man is going on that journey and seeing the puzzle pieces all fit together. So I won't get too much into it, but there's one specific character that our protagonist, if you can call him that, Zwygart, is haunted by throughout the movie, from the very beginning up until the very end. And the degrees of that haunting kind of changes nature as his ability to reconcile what he's done, understand the full depth of it, and then try and atone for his sins. The nature of that changes. So I'm just wondering, in terms. Let me just back up a second. My understanding, because I get most of my history from the movies. I was a bad history student in school. I've always heard, Switzerland is neutral. They don't take sides. But this is the first movie to really help me understand that you cannot just sit on the fence in a lot of these political struggles. You have to work within certain boundaries and push certain boundaries you might not be comfortable with philosophically as a nation, etc. So when it comes to what he had to do, some of them, ended up having monstrous consequences. So how did you reconcile that in terms of building this character and reconciling your own perhaps understanding of history? Maybe it was more nuanced than mine, certainly. Yeah, that's a lot of question there.
I think neutrality in itself is a very good thing, because we need neutral countries. We need places where the worst enemies in the world can meet and talk, even if they are forced to talk together. But we need these kind of spaces. What happened during World War II with Switzerland is that the country was surrounded by Italy, Germany, Austria, and France. So it was a very uncomfortable position, to say the least. But still, there was never a real threat against Switzerland, even after 1940, when France was invaded, because to make it simple, we were the Nazis' bankers, and a lot of goods and commodities circulated through the country between Italy and Germany on the railroads, etc. So we had many ties with the German economy since the 19th century, and this doesn't change like that, in a second. But it's not only a technical thing. It was really ideologically we had a strong connection with Germany since First World War, and during the Second World War, this was also present. So Switzerland had a very ambiguous position. It was a neutral country, but this neutrality was tainted by the fact that we had very strong ties with Germany, and we kept these ties even when the Allied forces threatened the Swiss government almost each year during the Second World War. 43 and 44, the threat was very concrete. We were supposed to stop all negotiations, all commercial exchanges, buying the Nazi gold, etc. The Allies were very conscious about what Switzerland was doing, but still the government never stopped till the end of the war. So that is not neutral. It's not a neutral position. And you can say whatever you like today. Switzerland was not neutral during the Second World War.
And that's I think when you look at the complicity, and again, I'm trying not to spoil anything here, but we can agree that the Nazis, at Germany, to whatever extent you wanted to say, back at that time, they were the bad guys, right? And then you've got the neutral party, and you've got the Allied forces who are the good guys. But history is never that clean, I think, as what you're kind of alluding to here. So it's just sort of these different shades of gray between ultimate good and ultimate evil, but nobody gets away unscathed. And I think particularly the last scene of the film talks about, very much speaks to that. And it's, of all the kind of horrific and horror movie elements that I saw throughout A Forgotten Man, that simple conversation at the end was, perhaps the most terrifying thing I've seen in quite a while. It's almost echoes a scene in Oppenheimer towards the end, where Oppenheimer tries to, talk to the president about what he had done and what he had unleashed, and he was kind of told, "Well, what do you think this is? It's not just a fun science experiment. You knew what you were doing at a certain point, and so did we."
But yeah, it's the Cold War that is mentioned at the end of the movie through this conversation between the American ambassador and the main character, the Swiss ambassador to Germany. The Cold War saved a lot of people's asses in the world, especially in Switzerland, because it kind of froze further investigations. At the end of the war, maybe it's a bit technical, but I need to say that Switzerland and the Allied forces had a strong conflict, and it was solved by what is called the Washington Agreement in 46. We had a lot of interaction between the Swiss government and the Americans. A diplomat was sent maybe 10 times to Washington to negotiate a way out, because the Allied condemned Switzerland for its collaboration with Germany. That's a historical fact that we never hear about, especially not in Swiss schools or in Swiss universities. We don't talk about that. But
or in American schools, yeah.
Yeah, the Washington Agreement was a sanction. The Swiss government was condemned to pay more than $250 million at that time, which was quite an amount, and it was the recognition of its role. And the Swiss, they accepted to pay. They had to pay because they knew they were guilty of collaboration with Germany. But then the Cold War started, and the Americans made a very lucid and radical and rational, pragmatic choice not to insist on the role of Switzerland, to have this, let's say, this safe place in the middle of Europe, to be able to have a neutral ground between the Russians and themselves. And that was the particularity of that moment. I don't know if it was clear what I said.
Yeah, very much so. And I think again, one of the great things about, I think, the screenplay and the drama that comes forth on the screen as a result of that is the unfolding of the realization of just how deep some of these ties go. Because in the beginning, Zwygart returns home from Berlin, as you mentioned, to his family. Um, and there's all of this kind of like political uncertainty as to what comes next because Hitler's dead, the Allies have moved in, and now everything's changing. So, what does that mean for a diplomat who has been, working in a large capacity with the Nazis? We see through photographs, see through files that are being burned, how involved he is. In a later conversation, we realize that a lot of his involvement and people that he knew and was friends with extends far back beyond what I think anybody had expected. And those are secrets that absolutely cannot get out because they would have far-reaching, dangerous consequences.
Hmm.
Perhaps, because we're looking at we fast forward to the end of the film and we're not so sure. Um, as far as the you mentioned before that you didn't want this to be just another World War II movie or just another war movie. And I've
Hmm.
noticed in the last, couple of years, specifically with last year's The Zone of Interest, which was sort of a bizarre family dynamic drama that took place on the other side of the gates of Auschwitz. And then now with your film, we're looking at I keep referring to it as a horror film because as Zwygart's conscience uh, catches up with him and the
Hmm.
truth begins to be more known in his inner circle and the outer circle, he begins to break down and see some terrifying images of being stalked, of even being murdered in some cases.
Hmm.
Uh, what was that? Did in trying to make something that wasn't like just a regular picture, a regular Holocaust picture, was that something genre-wise that you had conceived of? Like, this is how I want to tell the story through this lens, and what did that mean to you, and what were some of your inspirations or touch points in putting it together that way?
Hmm. Um, I think I wouldn't say it's a horror movie, of course not. But these scenes that are more like nightmares, are more like visions, are more like I see it as post-traumatic stress disorder. It's like he was not a soldier; he was a diplomat. But
Mhm.
diplomacy is another battlefield. It's another way of. It's a war in a certain way, and what he experiences is trauma. It's the materialization of his trauma. What he sees in his it's always visions in his head. It's closer to, I don't know, maybe if you remember that movie by Polanski called Repulsion.
Oh,
It's
yes, yes.
it's more this kind of thing, visions and things that are um, shocking for him, and also that unsettle the viewer, that take him out of the rational side of that movie. And I like to mix these two universes, these two worlds.
Yeah, when I said horror movie, first I'm a big horror movie fan. So when I watched this, what was kind of billed to me as a World War II drama, and I see these elements pop up, this is not a criticism, and I also don't mean to say to audiences like you're gonna just go see this really cool slasher, bloody, supernatural thriller or
Yeah.
something. It's not that. But what I appreciated was telling the story of this man's mental breakdown through sort of some of the conventional imagery that you might see in a horror movie, but placed into an unconventional context. You've got the sort of the ghostly figure of this person that was from Zwygart's recent past showing up. There's blood dripping from the mouth. You've got this person kind of enacting a phantom revenge that mirrors what happened to this character. It is all it's almost supernatural, but you can see it's just playing out as the deterioration of this very buttoned up guy's mind. It's
Hmm.
fascinating to me.
Yeah, you you got it.
But in kind of conceiving that, were there other besides like Repulsion, were there other kind of filmic inspirations or other stories that you've read that you keyed in to say, I want to tell a story this way, but I can use these elements from perhaps other genres to help sell it more effectively?
My goal was really to immerse the viewer in the story and to follow the character step by step, being in his shoes, discovering what is um, waiting in the dark for him. Um, and I liked to be a bit mysterious, to go, yeah, really step by step with him, with no anticipation. That we don't know much more than he does uh, when he evolves in the story. We learn the things and we understand the things with him at his pace, and that's something I really like. Now, in terms of genre, um, if I mixed other elements, I don't think so. Did this dimension of psychological horror or visions was the one element that I liked, because also it was a way of having an evocation of his role in the disappearance of that young man. And we little by little, we understand what he did, and what Zwygart didn't do to help him, which is even worse than acting. He chose not to act, not to help him, not to come to his help. When he could have behaved completely differently. He could have been super proactive. He could have maybe saved him.
Oh, I'm sure. And I want to talk about the actual filmmaking, but in a second. But tangential of that, you mentioned that you didn't want this to be a documentary because there'd been a million of those. But I will say there is the story of this young man and his arrest and what he was arrested for that is done strictly through dialogue and the telling of a very quick story. But the imagery is so evocative that I imagine that I was in that crowd with him when that thing happened. Now, I don't know if that was something that you kind of like dashed off or if you really spent a lot of time crafting the words just so that it was evocative enough. But I mean, that did more for me as a viewer than any documentary footage could
Mm-hmm.
have. Can you tell me about writing that specific scene, because this is something that you uh, fictionalized in a historical context, but without spoiling what it is? Why that moment? How did you come to it? And can you tell me about the struggle or non-struggle of writing it?
Well, I think it's one of the qualities of low budget movies is that you have to be super synthetical, and you have to convey things that you cannot film. You have to convey them through dialogue, through atmosphere, through acting. And when I started to write that sequence, the one you're talking about, between these two characters, talking about what the young man did in 1938, of course, in a huge big movie, you would have a reconstitution, etc., etc. And in the end, when you don't have the money to film these kind of things, it obliges your brain to be super efficient and say, okay, what's the most efficient way to take people in that situation that you're not going to film, but you're going to make it exist through words and through attitudes. So of course it took some time to write and to have in a correct way. And I think, yeah, it's limitations and obstacles oblige you to be more creative many times. We
Well,
only had I just want to tell you, we only had 18 days to shoot that film, so it was very short time.
18 days.
18 days, yeah.
Wow. Well, job well done, because it certainly doesn't feel like it. And as far as the financial aspect of it, I mean, this does not look like an inexpensive film. It is gorgeously photographed in black and white, and one of the opening moments is Zwygart, burning very important papers, and the eyes when he's staring into the fire. The actor Michael Neuenschwander, he was he's phenomenal. And I just want to ask about, let's key in on that scene. What was the decision to film black and white? And also in that moment when you're holding on his face and the reflections of his eyes almost look like perfect white pinpricks against this otherwise, it's a very crisp image, but there's something otherworldly about it. Was there any digital enhancements to it, or is it just that was just the art of the cinematography?
It's really the art of the cinematography. Of course, after when you do, it's called color correction, even when it's in black and white. But we didn't have any visual effects or any enhancing of that kind. It was just adjusting the contrast and things. Very classic color correction, color grading. Um, the decision to have it in black and white, I would say, has two main reasons. One is very simple. I love black and white. I never filmed in black and white, and I think it's a nice and strong convention. It's a contract that you sign with the viewer to say, let's go to the past. It's very classic, it's very academic, but I'm okay with that. And the other one is it's not just black and white. It's, for me, I define it as a grayscale that reflects the nuance of behavior and thoughts and in the main character. He's really a guy who's he's neither black nor white. He's really, and that's also the position of Switzerland, of course. This grayscale for me was very evocating, and the choice of black and white reflects that desire.
Can you tell me briefly about the casting of Michael Neuenschwander?
Well, Michael was an outstanding discovery. I was very happy to meet him. I met various actors, as always, in a classic casting. But immediately I felt that he had the solemnity, the the attitude. He could speak different languages. In Switzerland, we have many different languages: German, French, Italian, and a small fourth language called Romanche. And Michael could speak German, French, English, Hochdeutsch, which is not the Swiss German, it's the German from Germany. And as he was playing this character of a diplomat, I wanted him to be at ease and to be easily switching from a conversation in one language to another. That's a quality that he had. And then I think he's really a great actor. He brought a lot to the character. He did his own research. He was really involved in the theme. He had insight. He had ideas. He really helped me build, a sense of vraisemblance of reality with Zwygart.
Well, and I think I don't know how much of this was on the page versus what was worked out on the scene, but there is a moment where he and his family are getting ready to go out for the evening, and they are stopped by a car blocking their way out of their kind of compound. And in that moment, his blood really gets worked up, and he has a confrontation with the people in the car, but he brings it just up to the precipice before he's, kind of pushed back. And it made me wonder, was this his true nature, or is his true nature that more of a diplomat, but he had spent so much time in Berlin around these kind of militaristic, mighty forces that he sort of felt that he had some of that had rubbed off on him, and he found out that it really hadn't.
I think what he suffers, the character, not the actor, but is frustration. He thinks he's a big shot, and he doesn't realize that he's going to disappear little by little and be put under the rug. And this is unbearable for him. That confrontation with a small guard who prohibits him to leave his own house for a character of this stature, it's like falling from the sky. And then he has this internal frustration and violence that comes out. Again, it's about realizing that he will become a nobody. He will become a scapegoat, and this is unthinkable for him at that time. And that's also
Right.
why I think we develop some empathy with him, because nobody likes to be treated this way, you know.
Oh, of course. I want to last question. The film had its U.S. debut at the Miami Jewish Film Festival. How was it received? What have been some of the responses from audiences who've watched it?
I wasn't there, but I talked with the people, and I had some interviews as we do today with Zoom. Thanks for the COVID philosophy that we all use these distance videos. I think it was really well received. I'm very glad and very proud in a way to have this little Swiss independent movie released in the US. I guess, unfortunately, we're not over World War II. This subject keeps on being accurate and how to say, pertinent today, because this period in time conditions so many of the issues on the world stage. Not to say just the least would be the crisis with Russia. So I think these themes are very important. And in the United States, I think it's also very important to bring this subject forward and to put things on the table, because We are facing a dangerous world where the United States need to be, I think, and I believe in that, a very strong and clear partner. It has to play its part and to be generous and not to be isolating itself from the world stage.
Very well said. And I think, yeah, I feel like this movie is coming out exactly at the time that it needs to be, and that people need to go see it. Not only because of what you just said, but also the idea of, the forgotten man, this bit of history that is just sort of coming to light on a global stage thanks to your art. You know, 80 years plus after it was after the events happened, and us living under this kind of illusion that things went one way when they actually went another. So we're kind of constantly living through the fog of war, and I think it's up to artists and people who are open to learning about history, not being afraid of it, to share the true experiences, and get that out to people who need to learn from history so they don't repeat it. So in that sense, I thank you very much, Laurent. A Forgotten Man is playing in limited theaters. Hopefully, you'll get a much broader expansion so that you can come to Chicago. And
Love
if
to.
you do, I'll buy you a Chicago style pizza, and we'll talk movies.
Thank you for receiving me. Thank you very much, Ian, and
All right,
all the best.
all right. Thank you. Take care, sir.
Bye bye.